Also like to welcome you all here, those in present and those watching us online. Let's begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Prayer Demands by Paramhansa Yogananda. Driving the rebel king, ignorance. O mighty mystic judge of life, I ask thee in my hall of soul stillness, what is sin? Thy whispers of silence, dim at first, grew into bright articulations of thought. I heard and understood thy meaning. Sin is a rebel king. His name is ignorance. Ignorance is the perpetrator of all evil, the main root of the tree of ill health, the primal cause of all error and soul blindness. King Ignorance in his armory of bacteria, physical disease, mental desires, dullness and false ambition, spiritual indifference to high truths, have been devastating the nourishing harvest fields of spirituality. That harvest of countless fulfillments was ripe for reaping when the harsh tread of error trampled it to the ground. I wanted to weep with despair when I heard thy voice whispering to me in my soul, the sun of my protection shines on thee always, equally on thy sunny days and on thy cold, black nocturnal hours. Thou shouldst always have faith in me and smile, for the greatest of all sins against me is not to be happy. Let the ripples of unceasing smiles play over thy face. Through their transparency, my light will come to thine assistance. By smiling with determined happiness, thou wilt always please me. So the spiritual path, we're trying to get past King Ignorance and perceive the wisdom that lets us do that. And in this day and age, in moving from late Kali into early Dwapara Yuga, it seems like the reason and the intellect would play a big part of that. We are, after all, have moved into an age of reason, although the current public discourse, the idiocy of some of the things that go on notwithstanding, I think we are actually going to continue with reason and intellect, and the understanding is important for what we're doing. We have techniques, we have things we do, but it needs to go beyond that. We need to actually understand what we're doing. Yogananda didn't bring the worship, the spirituality of Kali Yuga, where people would worship, would do ceremonies, would do pujas, would try to feel a sense of devotion, but didn't necessarily have a sense of understanding of what they were doing. And so the topic is today is, well, what is the role? What is the right use of the intellect? Because as Jesus warns in the reading, said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for that childlike approach to God is what's necessary. Not childish, but childlike, to be able to come, to let aside some of this pretension. And Swami Kriyananda, our community's founder, gave us that example that when he came to Master as a 22-year-old, he had quite a developed intellect. He had studied and read and argued his way through college, and he said, I could best anyone in any kind of philosophical discussion or argument. But then I realized, where did it get me? I wasn't happy. And when he came to Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, his guru, accepted him, and he said, you have to get past this intellectual pride. You're too steeped in your intellect. You need to develop devotion. And Swami, being open to the guidance and having felt that he couldn't do this on his own and realized that he needed some help, started to develop devotion. And he would meditate and pray and chant and spend long hours. And he actually said he even looked at some of the other people in the ashram who weren't necessarily as prominent in their intellectual pursuits and said, I want to be like them. I want to have that simplicity of the child. So what happened next? Yogananda gave him the task of writing articles for the East-West magazine. And Swami thought, why is he giving me this, writing articles? He's trying to get me out of my intellect, but writing articles is obviously something that I need to reason, I need to use my intellect. And he was quite resentful of this for a while, but his guru asked him to do this, and so he did it. And he gradually came to realize that Master was not trying to have him suppress his intellect, but he was trying to have him use it in a correct way toward the spiritual path. And this is something that I can certainly relate to as an individual. I had the karma or whatever to be born in this age of the intellect, of reason, into a family that was quite intellectual. My father was advanced degrees in math and did computer programming. My mother studied science, and she applied all her formidable rational faculties to organizing a household where she had 4 children within 5 years of each other. And believe me, she did a formidable job of organization and following a rational approach to life. We went to church, but there wasn't a lot of devotion. There wasn't a lot of heart opening. It was sort of, the discipline, structure, form. And unfortunately, at times, it would get into what we're going to talk about a little later, a little bit of the negativity, the carping spirit. And my mother would always try to look at everything that could possibly go wrong and try to figure out how we're going to make this all work and how she's going to keep order in life. And there was one time that I remember distinctly that we were teenagers, and we were trying to be a little bit more independent. We were organizing something where we were going to take my sisters somewhere and we were going to come back. We had to pick them up. It was some complicated logistics that did not involve my mother. And so she started going through all these things about, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And finally, the last straw was she said, well, what if the car doesn't start? And so that was like, okay, Mom, so so there's some limitations to this, but I was blessed with the intellect and the strokes that society gave that, and it moved me into pursuing lots of studies in academia and consulting and just getting into this whole intellectual pursuit of getting all these very fine definitions. We could always define our way into understanding, we thought, and we'd take this separation, this analysis, and make all these definitions and then put them back together again in some new ways and then criticize the way the other person had put them together. And this was the intellectual pursuit. And when I came to the spiritual path, guess what? My mind said, oh boy, here's something new I can understand and analyze and start learning all these wonderful Sanskrit terms and all these definitions and all the ways they fit together and how this could work. And, I was doing yoga and meditating some, but my mind was very interested in yoga philosophy, and I approached it in this same analytical, dividing way of the intellect. And pretty soon I got to the point, I said, yeah, I think I've got this. I could give a good explanation of the chakras and the energy flow and how this worked and Satchit Anandam and Nirvikalpi Samadhi and all these things. But I had no idea what was really going on. I mean, I realized finally I didn't really have much realization in this. And it was just this trap of the spiritual ego. I mean, the wisdom can trap us in ego because we think we know something. Well, the same thing with spirituality. And again, it can be even worse because we think we know something that's better. We know something higher than all these poor lost souls up there. And, we get this spiritual pride going and we say, yeah, I know best and I can do this and I am doing this ego reinforcement. And Master Yogananda used to warn against this. And I just have to also say that at this time, I was exploring various spiritual paths and around yoga. And with my roommate, I received a letter newsletter. We wrote away for a newsletter of these various organizations. I received one from Ananda. This was back in the mid-'80s, and it was, Swami was writing, I think it was around his time of his marriage to Rosanna, and he was explaining that, and the whole letter was just filled with divine love and devotion and channeling these things and coming together to celebrate this beautiful, divine feelings of love. And I'm just going, what is this? This isn't, this isn't the yoga that I'm interested in. So I just put it aside. It took me another 6 years before I made it to Ananda. But Master warned against the pedantry of the spiritual path and of this false sense of intellectual pride. And he always liked to poke fun at intellectuals. He himself had all knowledge. He had tuned in intuitively, and he knew all these things. He could converse with anybody on their subject, with doctors. He conversed with Senor Cuarón's wife without knowing any Spanish, and she didn't know any English, and they understood each other perfectly. So he was certainly tuned in to this knowledge, yet he warned us against this pedantry. And he loved to tell the story of this philosopher. So this philosopher was sent by his wife out to the marketplace to get a bottle of oil. And so the philosopher bought the bottle of oil, and as he's walking back, he's looking at the bottle of oil, and he said, "Now, do my senses deceive me? Is the oil in the bottle, or is the bottle in the oil?" And he arrived home, and his wife met him at the door, and he said, "Well, where's the oil?" And he said, I'm coming to that. But wife, I've just had this incredible realization. My mind, my apperceptive perception realized that the oil may not be in the bottle, but the bottle might be in the oil. And his wife said, "Where is the oil?" I said, I'm coming to that. Just relax, just a minute. And then I took the bottle and I opened it and I turned it upside down. And I said, I think the oil was in the bottle. And his wife said, "You fool." And she took a broom and started beating him upside his perceptive head. And he said, now I know the oil was in the bottle. And so there's a story in the path that that Swami told about Master, that there was somebody that came to him, had all these questions. That this is the Master, I want to understand this philosophy, some typical outside intellectual approach. And he had all these questions prepared, and he read off this first question, and Master just looked at him and said, "Love God." And the man stopped, and well, maybe he didn't hear me. So he went on to his next question, and very detailed question that he outlined, and Master just said in a louder voice, "Love God." And he went on to his third question, and same answer, "Love God." And Master walked out of the room. So that's not exactly how he would answer everyone. Obviously, Swami asked many, many questions and got many answers to his questions. But in this specific case, Yogananda perceived this man had no sense of that inner realization, that no sense of being open to the truth, and just giving him these outward answers wasn't going to get him anywhere. So he tried to shock him into a change. Swami said, I don't think it worked, because this man later wrote a book where when he talked about Yogananda, he used him as an example of that sometimes masters can be a little quirky. So that was as much as he got from Yogananda. But on the other hand, Master, as we said, Master came at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. He came in this age of reason, an age of intellect. His first book that he wrote was called The Science of Religion. And that science of religion implies something to do with reasoning, with the intellect, with the experience. He wasn't saying that, no, we shouldn't do that. We just had to use the intellect properly. So what is the proper way to use the intellect? Well, one of the Gita reading here gives us some clues to this. It says, first, you have overcome the carping spirit. So clearly the wrong way to use the intellect is this carping spirit. And again, this is something, it's a tendency that I think it's innate in human nature. I think we all have it, some more than others. I certainly found myself with having this background of very much a carping spirit, which is the yeah, buts. Somebody would come up with an idea, and I thought it was my duty to say, but you haven't considered this, and you haven't considered this, and yeah, but this and this could happen, and that's like this, and we get into this thing, and where does that come from? It's from the ego. It's the ego separating itself and in some ways being dissatisfied with what it is that we see around us and wanting to separate itself from that. And what's that separation? That separation, that's the ego. The ego loves this complexity. It loves these definitions. It loves dividing. It loves judging. It loves analyzing. It loves evaluating. Why? Because it defines the ego. It puts us in this position of, I am saying what's going on here. I am pontificating. I understand this and I do this. And it's a separation. And that carping spirit separates us, and it blocks the flow of where true knowledge comes from. What Yogananda was saying, that intuition. That intuition comes in calmness, a calm mind, opening ourselves to perceive that truth that's always there. It's not defining our way into wisdom. It's perception of that wisdom. And so the right way of using the intellect is much more, we still have to have that intellect. I mean, after all, the animals who don't have an ego aren't really able to put themselves onto the spiritual path, to decide that they should change their destiny, to search, to realize that something is wrong. So we can do that. We have an ego, and we have this intellect, this reasoning, that can help separate, but it can also help move us in the right direction of the spiritual path. So we still want to dissociate ourselves from that reality, just as in the carping spirit, to judging everybody and acting this. But on the spiritual path, you're not going to receive this wisdom, this intuition, if you approach truth as if you were a lawyer in a courtroom, having to argue every single point and get down to the heart of it and make sure that it's actually right. As Yogananda said, there are so many things you don't know. How could you possibly think that you could argue your way into it? Because reason implies knowledge of the whole, and we don't have knowledge of that whole. So the right way of using that intellect is dissociate ourselves, yes, but then instead of looking outward for all the problems and trying to define that and for that, look inward. And look inward to what? The reactive process. What is it within us that's making me say, I don't like this, I don't like that, this should be like this should be that way? Take that reactive process and start analyzing it. So you have to disassociate, you have to realize what's happening, you have to accept what's happening. Why am I unhappy? I'm happy because I have this carping spirit that's always trying to judge the world, and it's not really working out that well. So what am I going to do about it? So then it's finding the direction. And again, this is all the intellect. This is all the ego tied with the intellect who's helping you do this. The ego, as we said a couple weeks ago, it can be both a friend and a foe. And Kriyananda realized that it wasn't enough to just say, yeah, I have to be less intellectual, or the problem is I'm not devotional enough. And what happened is his mind got in there and started becoming proud of his devotion. So you have to watch this intellect, but we have to also use it. We have to discriminate. We have to introspect. We have to relate to reality as part of reality rather than relating to reality as separate from reality. The carping spirit, that mind, is separating ourselves, defining. We want to find out what's the unitive part of this. And that's against the ego, trying to find that sense of unity, trying to unite ourselves with what's around us. So again, this is the spiritual path it's very important to have the right attitudes. And once we realize what we have to do, we can start trying to cultivate those attitudes. But the important thing to realize is that this way that we've been trained, or the karma, or that we've come down, of the intellect, it's a very pernicious foe. And it's going to keep kind of come in and claim, agency and claim benefit and get praise for a certain thing. You just have to keep pushing it aside and realize it's just a habit. It's a habit pattern. This way, this over-intellectuality or wrong use of intellect is just a habit. And Yogananda talked about habits. He said, you can change habits in a day. How do you change habits? Habits are just the custom, we're accustomed to energy, thought moving in a certain way, into a certain groove. By exerting our willpower and enough energy, we can switch it into another groove. And you can dissolve a habit in an instant, he said. Unfortunately for most of us, we don't necessarily command that energy and willpower to be able to do that. But it is possible. And it's very helpful to look at what Yogananda said about getting past habits when we're thinking about this dilemma with the intellect too. And so what did he say about habits? One of the things he said is you have to go with great energy and focus and willpower. So you have to have that awareness, and you have to bring energy to bear on it and to say, no, I'm not going to think in this way. Like sometimes I find myself, I've been serving as the village manager for a long time, and now I'm fortunately moving out a little bit, but you sort of have to deal with a lot, and you get into this carping spirit. You start looking at what's wrong, what needs fixing, and sometimes I find myself, I'm riding home on my bicycle, and instead of enjoying this beautiful day, I'm looking at the cracks in the road, and that's got to get fixed, and I'm looking at the shoulder, that doesn't have enough gravel, and that hasn't been fire cleared correctly, and this has to do this, and it's like, wait, no. Switch that energy. Thank you, God, for this beautiful day, for letting me live in this beautiful place. Let me feel that. So you have to catch yourself sometimes and put that willpower in, and it's substitute one way of thinking for another way of thinking. Instead of that division, that carping spirit, substitute in thank you for what we're doing. Try to develop that open heart, that sense of devotion, of trying to relate to what's around you, of feeling kindness towards others, of feeling a unitive spirit rather than trying to figure out what's wrong with all these people and judging them. And that especially applies to yourself. I mean, we're so used to this judgmental attitude. How often do we apply that to ourselves too? So often judging others is because we're trying to judge ourselves. And so just let that go. Put yourself, another really important way of looking at habits is put yourself in environments that reinforce where you're trying to go rather than reinforce where you've been. So living in spiritual community, satsang with Guru Bhais, is a tremendous way of doing this, of being around positive thinking, being away from this negativity. And, even in communities, there can be that carping spirit can come in and, distance yourself from that. If you start seeing that coming up in somebody or somebody's in a bad mood, distance yourself from that and take that as a place of, hey, I need to put myself in a place, in an environment that's going to reinforce what I'm doing. And of course, lastly, one of the things that Yogananda would talk about is nishkam karma. It's acting without desires for the fruits. That God put us in this situation. God made us with this ego that has to be friend and foe, this intellectual prowess that's going to get us into trouble, or it could get us to the right place. God put us here. And so you can say, whatever happens, God, it's yours. I just really blew it, but you know what, God? It's yours. You put me here. I'm giving this back to you. And by giving up that sense of me doing it, of saying, making God responsible for the good and for the bad, that's the intellectual reasoning, that's the way of thinking that's going to open the door to His grace, to His intuitive flow, which is ultimately what we need to get out of this delusion.
We're going to sing a children's song this morning, one that Swami Kriyananda wrote for his niece. It is light and joyful, but it also has a deeper meaning. Swami said that little Kathy represents that part of us that is totally positive and willing. The robin represents the part of us that is sometimes reluctant to embrace and follow God's plan. So let's now see if little Kathy can coax the robin to dance.
Little Kathy went dancing, went dancing, went dancing. Little Kathy went dancing one day. She danced out in the garden, the garden, the garden. She danced out in the garden, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. There she saw a small robin, small robin, small robin. There she saw a small robin, it sat in a tree. Little friend, come and join me, come join me, come join me. Little friend, come and join me, come dancing with me. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. I'm afraid I look silly, look silly, look silly. I'm afraid I look silly, the robin said then. For I'm timid and tiny, and tiny, and tiny. For I'm timid and tiny, birds can't dance like men. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. Bunch of wings you can fly with, can fly with, can fly with. Bunch of wings you can fly with, fly strut like a man. Everyone can do something, do something, do something. Everyone can do something, it's part of life's plan. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. Let's go call all our neighbors, our neighbors, our neighbors. Let's go call all our neighbors, the large and the small. All the world should be dancing, be dancing, be dancing. All the world should be dancing, for God made us all. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. La-ra-la-lee, oh la-ra-la-lay. Little Kathy went dancing, her heart was so gay. Peace gave us the mountains. Peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby.